noise stopped. Not gradually, not slowly, all at once. 1 second, the Kowloon morning market was a wall of sound, vendors shouting prices, cartwheels grinding over wet stone, children weaving between legs, the thick smell of ginger and fish and diesel hanging in the summer air like a curtain. And then, silence. The kind of silence that doesn't come from quiet, it comes from fear. Every vendor on that street felt it before they saw it, something primal, something old, the way animals go still right before a storm tears through the valley. Heads turned, hands froze mid-transaction. A woman clutched her basket to her chest without knowing why. In the middle of the market lane, between a dried goods stall and a noodle cart, a man was blocking the path. Not just any man. He was enormous. His name was Chung Wei Lok. Nobody called him that. They called him Big Chung. He was 6 feet 2 inches of deliberate intimidation, 260 pounds of muscle wrapped in arrogance. He worked as an enforcer for a local debt collector, the kind of man whose entire identity was built on the certainty that size made him untouchable. He'd been moving through that market for years like a slow rolling boulder. Everyone stepped aside. Everyone lowered their eyes. Everyone pretended not to see. That morning, he had decided that a woman named Mrs. Lamb owed his employer money. She didn't. Her late husband had borrowed a small sum months ago. He had died before repayment. And Big Chung, whether by instruction or by personal cruelty, had decided the widow would settle the debt herself, in front of everyone, in broad daylight. Mrs. Lamb was barely 5 feet tall. She wore a faded blue dress and carried a wicker basket. Her daughter, no older than 10, stood pressed against her side, fingers wrapped around her mother's sleeve. The little girl wasn't crying. She was too frightened to cry. Big Chung leaned down toward the woman, not close enough to touch, just close enough to make her lean back, to make her feel the shadow of him. "You think because your husband is dead you don't owe?" His voice was low, controlled, the kind of low that carries farther than shouting. "You think death cancels a debt?" Mrs. Lamb said nothing. She was shaking. He stepped closer. "I'll take the basket then, everything in it. And tomorrow I come back for more." He reached for it. She pulled it away, instinctively, desperately, and that single act of resistance seemed to amuse him. He laughed loud, the kind of laugh designed for an audience. The vendors around them stared at the ground. The fruit seller by the corner suddenly became intensely focused on arranging his oranges. The old man with the newspaper cart wheeled it slowly the other way. No one spoke, no one moved. Because getting involved with Big Chung meant a visit later. It meant broken stalls and damaged merchandise and whispered threats delivered at closing time. Everyone knew this, so everyone looked away. Except one person. He had been walking through the market alone. No entourage, no announcement. Just a young man in a simple white shirt and dark trousers, a paper bag of groceries under one arm, moving through the crowd with the unhurried ease of someone who had nowhere particular to be and everywhere to go. He was lean, almost too lean, some would say, the kind of build that didn't register as dangerous at first glance. Medium height, relaxed shoulders, the face of a man thinking about something mildly interesting. Bruce Lee was 27 years old. He had just returned to Hong Kong from the United States. He was not yet famous here, not in the way he would one day become. He was a martial arts instructor, a philosopher, a man in constant conversation with the ideas of speed, of efficiency, of what the human body could do when the mind stopped interfering. He had not come to this market looking for trouble, but he had seen the child's face. That was what stopped him. Not the shouting, not the size of the man, the face of a 10-year-old girl who had gone completely still, like a rabbit that has already decided it cannot run. Bruce stopped walking. He set his paper bag down gently against the base of the vegetable stall. He looked at the scene for exactly 3 seconds. Then he began walking toward it. Big Chung had Mrs. Lamb's basket now. She had let go of it, not because she wanted to, because he had moved his body between her and her daughter, a calculated, practiced move, and she had instinctively put herself between him and the child, and in doing so, she had released the basket. He held it up, looked inside, pulled out a bundle of green onions, and tossed it aside like it was nothing. The little girl flinched. "Smart woman," he said. "Smart women survive." He turned to leave. That was when the voice came. Quiet, completely conversational, not loud enough to perform, but loud enough to carry. "Put the basket down." Big Chung stopped. He turned around slowly, deliberately, the way large men do when they want the turning itself to be a statement. He saw Bruce Lee standing 8 feet away. For a moment, he genuinely didn't process it. He looked past Bruce, around Bruce, assuming there must be someone else, someone bigger, someone who looked the part. There was no one else. Just this lean young man in a white shirt, standing with his hands loose at his sides. No tension in his body, no trembling, no performance of bravery, just stillness. Big Chung looked him up and down once, the kind of slow, contemptuous assessment that was itself an act of aggression. He smiled. "Did you just speak to me, little man?" Bruce said nothing. "Walk away," Big Chung said, "while you still have legs to walk with." The people watching, and there were more of them now, stopped in their tracks, frozen at the edges of the lane, collectively held their breath, because they knew what happened to people who didn't walk away. They had all seen it before. The man in the white shirt did not walk away. He took one step forward. Just one. And something in that single step, the quality of it, the complete absence of hesitation, made Big Chung's smile flicker for just a fraction of a second. He crushed it quickly, reset to grin. "You have a death wish, boy." Bruce said nothing. "I asked you," Bruce said calmly, "to put the basket down." 3 words, repeated. No emotion, no anger, no escalation. Just clarity. Big Chung dropped the basket deliberately, not in compliance, but in the way a man drops something before he uses his hands for something else. The onions scattered across the wet stones. Mrs. Lamb made a small, helpless sound. Her daughter buried her face in her mother's sleeve. He cracked his neck. Left side, right side. He walked toward Bruce. The crowd had completely stopped now. A vendor who had been mid-sentence with a customer simply trailed off. The customer didn't notice. Neither of them moved. The noodle cart owner leaned forward over his cart, mouth slightly open. Big Chung was used to this part. This was the moment he lived for. The slow approach, the size advantage made physical and undeniable, the moment where the other person's body betrayed them, where the legs stiffened, where the eyes darted sideways searching for escape. He was 3 steps away. 2. He was watching Bruce's face for it. For the crack, for the flicker of realization. He watched, and watched, and there was nothing. The young man's eyes were absolutely steady, not the steadiness of someone fighting panic. Bruce had fought panic years ago and won. This was something else entirely. This was a man standing on completely familiar ground. Big Chung was the one who felt the strangeness of it. He didn't show it. He pulled back his right arm. He had knocked men unconscious with that arm, men larger than this one. His fist was the size of a stone. He swung. What happened next was witnessed by approximately 40 people. Every single one of them described it differently. Because the human eye has limits. The human eye is not built to track what happened in the space between Big Chung's swing and the moment he was on the ground. The vendors closest to the scene said Bruce simply wasn't there when the fist arrived, that one moment he was standing still, and the next moment the space he had occupied was empty, and the fist swung through air. One witness, a retired schoolteacher buying radishes, said she saw Bruce's body rotate. That's the only word she could find. Rotate, like the laws of motion simply bent slightly around him. What everyone agreed on. The swing missed. Big Chung's momentum carried him forward. Half a step. Just half a step. The kind of micro-stumble that wouldn't register in any other context. But context was everything. Because in that half step, Bruce Lee had already moved. Not backward. Not away. Through. He had slipped inside the arc of the swing. Inside it. Closer. Not farther. And by the time Big Chung's fist completed its arc through empty air, Bruce was standing 6 inches from his chest. Inside his reach. Where his size meant nothing. The first strike came from Bruce's right hand. It was not a punch. Not exactly. It was a controlled, accelerating palm heel strike to the solar plexus, the kind of blow that doesn't make a dramatic sound, but lands with the compressed force of a piston firing. It took approximately 0.3 seconds from start to impact. Big Chung's lungs emptied. His body bent forward, involuntarily, completely, the way a tree bends under sudden wind. The second movement was Bruce's left hand. It caught the back of Bruce's wrist, the right wrist, the striking arm, still completing its useless arc, and redirected it downward into the side with a sharp arc that produced an audible pop from the shoulder joint. Bruce made a sound. Not a shout, not a roar. A sound that men don't make in public. A short, involuntary exhalation of shock and pain combined. The third movement was the one that ended it. Bruce had already shifted his weight to his right foot. His left knee came up, ankling inward. His right hand, returning from the palm strike, recoiled and reformed, 2 knuckles extended, and drove upward and slightly left into the pressure point beneath Bruce's right ear. 1.8 seconds. Total. From the moment Big Chung's swing began to the moment his legs registered no further instruction from his brain, 1.8 seconds had elapsed. The big man crumpled. Not dramatically, not backward in a movie arc. He folded, knees first, then forward at the waist, then sideways, his shoulder catching the edge of the noodle cart on the way down, rattling the pots, sending steam hissing upward into the morning air.
He hit the stone floor of the market, and he did not get up. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For a full 5 seconds, the Kowloon morning market existed in a state of suspended disbelief. The retired schoolteacher still had a radish in her hand. The noodle cart owner was leaning so far forward over his cart that he was in genuine danger of falling. Big Chung lay on the whetstones, conscious, barely. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at the sky between the market awnings, blinking slowly. His right arm was angled wrong, not broken, but wrong. He didn't try to stand. Something in his body had understood what his ego had refused to consider. Some deep animal intelligence was telling him clearly and without argument, "Stay down." Bruce Lee straightened his shirt. He walked to the scattered basket, picked it up, gathered the green onions from the ground, placed them back inside, walked to Mrs. Lamb, and held the basket out to her. She took it with both hands. Her fingers were shaking. He looked at the little girl. The child looked up at him. He smiled at her, brief, warm, the smile of someone saying, "It's over now." Then he walked back to the vegetable stall where he'd passed his groceries, picked up the paper bag, and continued through the market.
He didn't look back. That was the detail people remembered most. Not the speed, not the precision, not the sound Big Chung made when he hit the ground. The fact that Bruce Lee picked up his groceries and kept walking. No bow, no speech, no moment of standing over the fallen man to survey the damage. No performance for the crowd that was now staring at him with wide, unblinking eyes. He turned the corner at the end of the market lane and disappeared between a fabric stall and a dried fish vendor. And just like that, he was gone. For 3 full seconds after he vanished, nobody in that market lane moved. Then someone exhaled. Then someone else. Then the noodle cart owner slowly, carefully leaned back upright. Then the fruit seller put down the orange he'd been holding so tightly that the skin had dented under his thumb. Then everyone started talking at once. Big Chung's associates found him 11 minutes later. He was sitting against the base of a wall near the noodle cart, his back straight, his right arm held carefully against his chest. The market had resumed around him. Not because people didn't care, but because the vendors understood instinctively that the fastest way to erase what had happened was to pretend the world had already moved on. His associates tried to help him stand. He shrugged them off. He didn't want to be helped. Not here. Not where people could see. They said he didn't speak on the walk back. Not one word. Not a sound. His face had gone completely neutral. Not angry. Not embarrassed. Just blank. The expression of a man whose internal architecture had shifted and who hadn't yet figured out what the new structure looked like. He never returned to that market. Not the next week. Not the next month. Not ever. His employer sent other men after that. Nobody asked why. Hong Kong in the early 1970s did not have smartphones. It did not have social media. What it had was something far older, and in many ways far more powerful. It had people who talked. By noon that day, the story had traveled 4 city blocks in every direction from the Kowloon morning market. By evening, it had crossed harbor. By the following morning, it existed in 3 different versions, each one slightly more impossible than the last, in tea houses and barber shops and the back rooms of training halls from Mongkok to Wan Chai. The retired school teacher told her neighbor. Her neighbor told her son. His son trained at a kung fu school in Jordan, and he told his sifu before class that evening. His sifu had heard a version already, slightly different in the details but identical in the essential fact. Someone had dropped Big Chung in a market, and the someone was a lean young man in a white shirt who had walked away without looking back. The details that survived every version. The speed. The complete silence before it happened. The fact that the big man never saw it coming. And the smile the young man gave to the little girl. That detail, the smile, was the one that made people pause. It humanized something that might otherwise have seemed inhuman. Because the speed was hard to believe, the efficiency was almost disturbing in its completeness, but the smile to the child afterward, that was recognizable.
That was something people could hold in their hands. That was the part that made the story true. People who understood Bruce Lee, really understood him, not the myth but the man, knew something important about that moment in the market. He had not acted on instinct alone. He had acted on philosophy. This is the part that most people miss when they tell the story. Because the story is easy to tell as a story about fighting, about a small man defeating a large man, about speed overcoming size, and all of that is true, but it is not the whole truth. Bruce Lee had spent years, obsessive, relentless years, interrogating a single question. What is the most honest response to a given situation? Not the most dramatic response, not the most impressive response, the most honest one. When he saw Big Chung in that market, he didn't see a fight. He saw an equation. He saw a woman being diminished in front of her child. He saw 40 people looking away because the cost of looking up felt too high. He saw a child learning in real time that the world would not intervene on her behalf. And he calculated, in the half second before he set his groceries down, that someone needed to change the variables. That was all. Not heroism in the grand Hollywood sense, not a burning desire to prove something, just a man who had done the internal work of knowing exactly what he believed, and who was therefore free to act on it without hesitation. Hesitation, Bruce had written in his notebooks, is the gap between knowledge and belief. When you truly believe something, the hesitation disappears. He believed that the strong do not have the right to diminish the vulnerable. He believed that skill existed to protect, not to perform. He believed above everything that a person's size, physical or social, gave them no moral authority whatsoever. So there had been no hesitation. The groceries went down. The steps forward happened. The rest was simply physics.
Here is what Big Chung did not understand. He understood strength. He had spent years building it. He had used it as a tool, a language, a claim on the world. And in his experience, strength worked. It worked every single time. People stepped aside, people went quiet, people paid. What he did not understand, could not understand, because nothing in his experience had prepared him for it, was that Bruce Lee had spent an equal number of years doing something completely different. He had spent years removing wasted movement, removing emotional noise from physical response, removing the gap between decision and action, removing every technique that looked impressive but cost more energy than it produced, removing ego from combat, which is perhaps the hardest removal of all, because ego whispers constantly that the performance matters, that the audience is watching, that winning isn't enough if it doesn't look like winning. Bruce had removed all of it. What was left, what Big Chung encountered in that market lane, was something that doesn't have a clean name in English. In Bruce's own words, written in the margins of training manuals and personal journals, he called it directness. Not aggression, not violence, not dominance. Directness. The shortest path between the problem and the resolution. No theater, no announcement, no excess. Just the exact amount of force, precisely placed, for exactly as long as required. 1.8 seconds. That was the entire length of the conversation Big Chung's body had with Bruce Lee's philosophy. 3 months after that morning, Mrs. Lamb told the story to her sister. She had not told it before, not because she didn't think about it. She thought about it often, more than she expected to, but because putting it into words felt like it would somehow reduce it, like the experience existed at a frequency that ordinary language couldn't quite reach. What she said to her sister was this. She said that the most frightening moment of that morning was not when Big Chung reached for her basket. It was the silence before the young man spoke. Because in that silence, standing with her daughter pressed against her side and 40 people looking away, she had felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in the long months since her husband died. A particular variety of aloneness that has nothing to do with solitude and everything to do with the realization that the world is indifferent to your suffering. And then a voice had said, "Put the basket down." And the silence changed. She said it was the same silence, but with a different weight, like the same water, but suddenly warm. She could not explain why those 4 words, spoken quietly by a stranger she had never seen before and would only see once more, briefly at the New Year market 2 months later, where he nodded at her and she nodded back, and that was the entirety of their second meeting. Could not explain why those words stayed with her longer than almost anything else in her adult life.
Her sister asked, was he frightened? Mrs. Lamb thought about this for a long time. Then she said, he looked like a man who had already answered every question he was ever going to be asked. In the months that followed, the story continued to circulate. It shed some details and gained others. In some versions, Big Chung had 3 associates with him. In others, Bruce had walked away before the man even hit the ground, as if he didn't need to see the conclusion because the conclusion was never in doubt. In one version, told reliably by a retired police officer in a Tim Chatoy tea house, Bruce had been carrying his daughter when it happened. He had no daughter at the time, but people need their legends to feel complete. What remained constant across every version, every tea house, every training hall, was the essential truth at the center of it. A man had tried to use his size as a weapon against someone who had none, and the world had answered him. Not with matching size, not with matching aggression, not with anything that fit the logic of his world at all. It had answered him with something he had no category for, and the answer had taken less than 2 seconds. In the years that followed, as Bruce Lee's name grew beyond Hong Kong, beyond Asia, beyond anything that Market Lane could have predicted, the story became one of dozens. One chapter in a mythology that kept expanding. One data point in an argument the whole world was slowly coming to accept. But for the people who were there that morning, the school teacher, the noodle cart owner, the fruit seller, Mrs. Lamb and her daughter, it was never just a story. It was a Tuesday morning in Kulong. It was green onions on wet stone. It was the sound of a paper bag being set down gently against a vegetable stall. It was the specific quality of silence that falls when something impossible just became real in front of your eyes.
Bruce Lee once wrote, "The possession of anything begins in the mind." Big Chung had possessed his reputation for years, had built it carefully, maintained it deliberately, protected it with casual cruelty whenever necessary. His power existed entirely in the minds of the people around him, in their willingness to look away, in their calculation that resistance cost more than submission. Bruce Lee had walked into that lane and simply refused to make that calculation. Not because he didn't understand the cost, because he had already decided what things were worth. This is what separates the legendary from the merely powerful. The powerful understand leverage. They know what people fear, and they apply it. They have learned that the world, left to its own momentum, tends to accommodate them. The legendary understands something different. They understand that the world's momentum is not a law, it is a habit, and habits can be interrupted by a voice, by a step forward, by the complete and total absence of hesitation in the body of someone who has done the interior work of knowing, without any ambiguity, what they stand for. Bruce Lee stood for this, that a child should not learn at 10 years old that the world will not intervene, that a woman carrying a basket of vegetables should not be made to feel that her smallness makes her invisible, that size, physical, financial, social, is not permission. It never was. It never will be. 1.8 seconds. That was how long it took to say all of that. They said Bruce Lee was fast. They were right. But speed was never the point. The point was that he had already decided, long before that Tuesday morning, long before the market, long before the moment Big Chung turned around looking for someone worth worrying about, he had already decided exactly who he was. And a man who knows who he is doesn't need a single extra second. The footage was never released. Big Chung never returned to that market. The little girl grew up, and somewhere in the Kowloon morning market, on a Tuesday in the early 1970s, 40 people learned something they would carry for the rest of their lives. That courage doesn't announce itself. It just sets down its groceries and walks forward. If this story moved you, if you felt something in those 1.8 seconds, hit subscribe, because this channel exists for exactly this, the moments history forgot to film, the lessons that never made the textbooks, the truth hiding inside the legend. Subscribe. You won't regret it.